Hey everybody, welcome back to the IronWorks podcast. I'm Pastor Tyler.
And I'm Zach.
And we have a very special guest with us today. This is Pastor Lloyd Pulley.
Hey guys.
From Calvary Chapel, Old Bridge, New Jersey, is with us, and he's down at the church helping us with an event. So we're going to take a short break from our series on the Trinity. We'll finish that up in just a couple weeks here, but we didn't want to pass up this opportunity to get him on to talk with us. So Pastor Lloyd, why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your ministry, how you got saved, all that.
Oh my goodness. I grew up in a broken home. My dad had left. My mother had died. My grandmother raised me and my three older sisters, and she took us to church. That's where I got introduced. But when I was 13, I had the world's problems solved from my bedroom, figured I got this worked, and walked away from the church. I was able to convince my grandmother I didn't need to go, and broke her heart, but she prayed. And God had a way of bringing me back around to him. My first term in college, the Michigan State wrestling team, going for chemical engineering. I had this whole plan for my life, and the Lord just changed it with hope in the gospel and rekindled that fire in my life. And then, of course, I was ruined. The first young lady I led to the Lord, I could do nothing else. All I could think of was, I've got to do this for life. So I left the university. Everyone thought I was crazy. I had a full scholarship. Went out to Southern California, where my sister was going to this church called Calvary Chapel.
Hey.
Trained people in the ministry on the job. And it just seemed so good to me. I could never imagine myself being a pastor, though, because I'm on fire for Jesus, and church was kind of boring, and you kind of endured it. And then I walked into Calvary Chapel, and Raul Reese, preaching the gospel. I felt right at home, and I'm thinking, man, he's butchering the English language. If he can minister, maybe there's hope for me.
Hey, if y'all don't know what Raul Reese sounds like, go treat yourself.
Praise the Lord, man.
That's what he sounds like. And you'll be edified and get to hear that too.
I learned, the Lord humbled me in all my education and taught me how the Holy Spirit works through people who have a passion for him. And I learned passion in ministry, and I had a call, went out to New Jersey in '84, planted a Bible study. By then, all personal ambition was beaten out of me. I'm just going to, if I get 10 people to pour into them and make them the most well-loved, well-taught people, that was my goal. And the Lord just blessed, and, just always taking some crazy step of faith. I'm driving my board crazy, from going on the radio, buying a radio station, getting Bridge Women's Center, school, and, a lot of ways to just impact the community and outreach. Our big Bridge Fest, annual Bridge Fest, draws about 10,000 people to Jersey Shore, and
wow.
Tons of people respond to the gospel, and it's just a blessing. And then a lot of churches gone out from us. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. It'll be 40 years since we moved out to New Jersey next year.
Wow.
So it's our 40th
Congratulations.
anniversary.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is 40. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is wonderful to hear about that. There's a lot in there already we could talk to you about, but so let me just ask you the question. So you went out to Southern California to Calvary Chapel when? What time was that?
That was, I went out in 78, summer of 78.
Okay.
I joined, I was on a campus crusade for Christ in Newport Beach. That's where I got introduced first to Costa Mesa with Chuck Smith and just visiting there, and then came up and went to West Covina and knew I was home when I walked in.
What was that like out there during that time, just those earlier years of Calvary Chapel? Zach and myself have grown up in Calvary Chapel, born and raised in Calvary Chapel. What was that like at that time?
Well, as a young intern, watching the church go from 600 to 5,000 in a matter of a couple of years, it was off the charts. It was like, well, first of all, every altar call Raul would have, I would be shaking my head like, I don't know if these people know what they're doing, but they'd come by the hundreds. And then I would counsel them in the new believers room, and they were genuine encounters with God, and we'd of course explain, and then next thing you know, they'd bring in all their friends. There was not a time during those years that there wasn't at least 50 to 75 people coming forward, and then it wasn't just all emotional as they've been accused of. It was the real deal. They understood, because I made sure in the new believers counseling room, that was my job. You understand what you did. Now you didn't get saved by going forward. This is what it means, and I just explain it very clearly. And man, to see that genuine work in people's hearts was amazing. Yeah,
Raul Reese definitely seems to have the gift of evangelism. I would guess. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I mean,
some people just have the ability just to do it, and people respond.
I would see sometimes when he would just give a message on something that had nothing to do with it, but his passion for listen, if you need Jesus, come down right now. If you don't know where you're going to hell. And he would just, everything wrong, right? That I would not do. It wouldn't fit me. But God just used him. And I learned at that point, it's not by might nor by power. It's by my Spirit. That's what we need to remember in ministry.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about your ministry now. So you already mentioned a couple things. The church is Calvary Chapel, Old Bridge, New Jersey. How are things going? How are things going for you?
It's really been a blessing. We took a crazy step of faith. We had bought 110 acres, at one point about almost 20 years ago, and we had the big plan for a facility, and the Lord just convicted me because a radio station came available, and we've been praying for a while. I was on Salem Network. It was very expensive. We had some great outreaches in New York City. There was a real hunger. People were coming to the church. But they had a lot of other stuff on there that just wasn't really edifying, in my opinion. And I just longed for a station to go through the scriptures. A lot of stations were going music at that time, and we wanted something that brings teaching. So a station came available. We took a step of faith, but then my board wisely said, you got this big project over here, and you got this radio network now that it's expanding in New York. You got to pick one. And that was a hard decision, but I wasn't really. I said, Lord, I kind of got convicted. Prepare your work in the field, and afterward build your house. And I felt the field still had a lot of work to do. So we ended up selling that property and investing in a huge network that reaches about 7 million potentially.
Wow.
And
so just to clarify for those that are listening, and I'll just confirm, you declined to purchase 110 acres.
Well, we had purchased it.
Or you backed out of that,
yes,
or sold it?
We sold it.
Where you were going to build your new church building so that you could purchase the radio.
Yeah, we decided, station. I could build a sanctuary that seats a couple thousand and have this outreach there, but we could reach millions on the radio and also plant other churches.
Where does Bridge FM reach?
Well, we broadcast from Manhattan, the only Christian station in the area that broadcasts from Manhattan, on top of the Trump Tower. And great working with the Trump organization, by the way, compared to other places we've had to. But it reaches all of a lot of Brooklyn, Manhattan, clear, very signal in Manhattan. We also have a signal in Fort Lee, and Poughkeepsie, and Orange County, New York, and plus in our area in Old Bridge, and also down in the shore. So it reaches about 7 million potential.
All right. Yeah, when we started going on the radio here at the church, there were some folks, nobody really opposed it, but there were some people that were like, are you really sure that radio is where we want to be investing our time and our money?
It's a great question. When everything was going technologically, podcasts and this sort of thing, they thought radio's going down. But the funniest thing is, in the last 5 years, radio listenership has actually gone up. It's still about 93% of people in America listen to radio. So it's just too easy to put the radio on when you get in your car.
It's already there.
When you try to think, well, what podcast do I want to go to? What do I listen to? What audio version?
By the time I decide, I've already got there.
You've already listened to something that's intriguing, exactly, on the radio.
Yeah, that was my first job in Christian ministry, was at Equip FM in Virginia, working as a DJ there. And I remember we got this marketing breakdown, or as an article that had been written where somebody had put out the best way your small business can spend your advertising dollars is on local radio, because that's still the best way to reach people.
You really do develop a family of listeners, and then during the middle of COVID, we started a live call-in program that now is national. It's all over the place.
What's that called?
It's called Bridge Bible Talk. A call-in program for all your Bible questions and questions on the Christian life. And that has proved to be one of the most wildly popular things. And I do that 4 times a week, and then we pick the best out of Monday through Thursday, and we air that on Friday. But I'm in the studio 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we're answering questions on the fly.
Wow, I bet you get a lot of interesting questions airing out in Manhattan and New York.
We have a lot of people represented down here in the South, because we're on a network of stations that, a friend of mine actually had a huge network in the South, from Alabama, Georgia, all the way Louisiana, Texas. And then, of course, we have Hawaii, we have the Northeast, we have all of our signal. We have another sister signal or station about our size in Philadelphia area and Baltimore. So it reaches in the Midwest. So it's been amazing. We get calls from all over.
So let me ask Pastor Lloyd, because I know, like, in general, I think we're all of us are kind of big fans of radio for church ministry, but I also feel like there's something specific to Calvary about that audio teaching ministry that feels like it's kind of part of our DNA. I mean, Tyler is talking about how it's at his guys' church in Calvary Chapel Lynchburg. They've been doing the same thing. They've got a station that they're running now. I can remember, being 4 and 5 years old, and my parents had one of those big old double tape deck boom boxes that they would just drop tapes in, and I would listen to Pastor Chuck and Pastor Joe Foch, and the hearing of the word, and that being part of your constant diet, and being able to then spread that out all over the country, even to places where your church couldn't reach, has kind of seemed to be like this part of the DNA of Calvary. What is there any reason why you think that is, or what benefits we have from that?
I've often been tempted. In fact, we were on local cable for a while, and I discovered something. When I was on cable, people recognized me wherever I went. And that was kind of impressive. That was kind of cool. Wow, they're really right. They know. I mean, people see you. It became wildly attractive for many people to go TV. But here's the thing. TV is very impersonal. It's you're distracted with the image and all the other things. You're half paying attention. But when you get in your car, you turn the radio on. And radio people that are involved in radio realize you're not talking to this, hello, all radio audience out there.
You talk to one person.
You're talking to one person. And it's extremely personal. And I can't tell you that's what Chuck Smith tapes meant to me in the beginning. That's what radio means to many people. God is having a conversation with them through the ministry you have, and it's powerful and it's impactful. So to me, it's a lot more personal. Yeah. And that really is. The ear gate is huge.
And I think maybe too, because it's the systematic teaching of the word, it's something people don't often get at their churches.
Yes.
And so they like, oh, this is great. I love my pastor. I love my church. I love what he's teaching. But here's a guy on the radio teaching through the book of Romans. So I'm going to listen to that too. And that way we're contributing to somebody else's ministry, which is
Absolutely.
Great. I love that.
And you know what? Again, when people hear good exposition of the scripture and it's applicable to life today, it's very powerful. And they do. Look, I can tell you a lot of churches have gone to expositional teaching because they see the fruit of it. People are wanting that. I had a wild experience. I went back to my home church in Michigan. My grandmother was bragging to the pastor that I grew up in. He was a preacher kind of a guy. And he'd be in this text and that text. He'd be all over the place. You never knew where he was going to be. And just a loud preacher. And he was intrigued at how quick our church had grown. And I told him, well, I went through the book of Ephesians in a couple of years, and the church tripled in that time. And it piqued his interest. So I came back the next year, and he had started teaching through the scripture, and the church started growing like crazy. So they gave him another church in someplace else, but the board insisted whoever comes in, they wanted them to go through the scriptures. So I thought that was a great encouragement, and I think pastors, if they're listening, listen. You can sermonize, and this is the thing I tell people. I said, there's a lot of pastors that teach from the Bible, but there's very few pastors that are teaching the Bible, and there's a difference. Teaching from the Bible, I'm the editor. I'm going to pick and choose what I think the body needs. When I'm going through the scriptures, I can't avoid anything. I got to let the text speak, and it's powerful.
Yeah, I remember when I was at one of our pastors' meetings and locally, and they all know that we teach verse by verse. And some of the guys around here do, or they'll do a series, through Philippians, and then they'll go back to what they were doing or something. And I said, I got a couple of scriptures I want to share, and I just read like 2 or 3 verses and kind of tie them together. And Pastor Bo Johnson said, well, Tyler, it's just nice to know that you can, in fact, turn the pages of your Bible when you're preaching. He was giving me a hard time for teaching verse by verse that way, but everybody, I don't.
Well, people can
really
be lazy verse by verse. They can just read a verse, make a few comments, read a verse, make a few comments, and it's not that. You really do need to let the text breathe as a message that God has given.
Right. Yeah, and I tell you, my dad tells stories when he went out to Lynchburg that he got a lot of like pushback on people that they'll never work. People don't want to hear that. I've not really encountered much of that, and so I think there may have been a change. I'm sure Calvary Chapel is a big part of that.
To the contrary, I think everybody that I talk to when they start coming to our church, I'm like, how are you guys doing? And what, and it's like, well, we heard you on the radio. Or we saw you on YouTube, and you were teaching through the Bible, and they're just so hungry. People are so hungry for that.
We started listening to your teaching in addition to our pastor, but then we started realizing, like, this is really where we want to be and what we want to do.
Well, we saw during COVID, there was a lot of visitors because their churches were closed down. And so they'd usually, I'd go up to new people I'd never met, and I'd say, so how did you find us? And they says, well, our church closed, and so we started coming here. And I says, well, we're happy to provide a place for you until your church opens. And they would usually say, we're not going back there. They found the Word of God. And I really believe God used COVID to really shake people up and found out they were in places that weren't really biblical. And they started coming and growing, and it gave us a whole new life and excitement and a lot of young people. I feel like I'm starting ministry all over again. I'm watching, I'm the old guy now.
That's exciting.
I got my Medicaid card,
Hey,
I just got that this year. I'm a dyslexic 56.
Well, whenever people, I'll say I'll know that I'm no longer a young pastor, and people stop asking me how old I am when I tell them what I do. What are you? I'm a pastor. Really? How old are you? They don't do that for engineers and things. Oh, yeah, engineer? How old? So that's really great though. And the teaching of the Word is, if you haven't had it, you don't know what you're missing. I'll put it like that way. And radio seems to be a great format for that. And I love hearing that Calvary and then other Bible teaching is out in even in the big cities like that, up in New York. And down here in Alabama, we kind of view those places as kind of like, well, just all we need is one good hurricane to sweep them off into the ocean like Atlantis, and then we'll all be better off. But there's people serving and ministering, and
New York,
and I'm sure there's
New
a lot
Jersey has been tough. I mean, in the beginning, it seemed very slow, but God has been faithful.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are, you talk about the Bible says righteous Lot was vexed every day by the iniquity of his city, and I'm not casting aspersions on anybody that lives in New York or anything, but there are godly people there that are like, what do we do now? And they need that encouragement and that teaching, and the people need the gospel.
These pressing times where we know we're looking around, is the world gone crazy? I mean, with this wokeness, with LGBTQIA+, with all of this stuff, what's happening is that the average person that's not a believer, is realizing this is crazy.
Right, this is too
And
weird.
they're looking for somebody that's going to be bold enough to say it. And when they find somebody that's biblical and they're coming, we have a lot of non-believers coming to the church simply because it's a little escape from this nonsense world, and now they find the gospel.
Like, what were we doing before this? I've seen people say, all right, well, this is nuts. What was the last thing we were doing? And a lot of folks that want to bring their kids to church, because I want my kids to at least be in church, even if I don't, at least especially around here, you might not get this up there so much, but it's like, I don't have any opposition to the gospel or to the Bible. And there are even folks that even might very well believe intellectually, I believe that Jesus died on the cross, even though they're not born again. But because they're like, well, that's the story that I believe, and that's the book that I believe, and they'll get mad if you insult the church, and they'll send their kids to church, but they themselves need to find the Lord, of course, right? You believe God is one, but so do the demons. So
I forget what introduction of which commentary it was, but one particular author put it this way, that everybody needs to have a first century conviction experience with God. In other words, they've encountered Him, and when a person does, they pass it on to their children. But what happens is, it's hard to pass conviction on. Yeah. You pass it to generally goes to from conviction to belief. Yeah. So kids in a Christian home, well, I believe in Jesus. I mean, I have no reason not to believe in Him. As I was raised. But then they take that belief. By the third generation, it goes from conviction to belief to opinion. And now it's just your opinion. That's my opinion. We all have an opinion. It's no better than anybody else's opinion.
Right.
So I think that when that breaks down, and this is what you see in society today, there's a void, and they're looking for people that have and can speak with conviction.
Yeah. Well, that's as good a transition as we're going to get. That's awesome. Talking about wild times we're living in, and about the need to speak up and speak to conviction. You mentioned the Bridge Women's Center, and the reason Pastor Lloyd is down here with us is he's going to be speaking at the Positive Choices Fundraiser Gala, which is the pregnancy center that we support, which is a pro-life ministry. And that's changing for us in Alabama because of the way the laws are structured, mercifully. But tell us a bit about the Bridge Women's Center and what it is and how you got involved.
I had an elder that came to me and he says, I've just been really doing a lot of research in the pro-life field, and I want to start our pro-life ministry up here. And I said, well, of course we're pro-life. I mean, from the pulpit, I'm not shy about this at all. But he said, but I really want to mobilize people to actually get out there and do something. And I said, well, what do you have in mind? And I said, I in the past, I remember some of the really heavy protests that got really rancorous, because I don't think ministries separated the political aspect and the actual personal, where women who feel they have no other choice are showing up at these clinics.
Sure.
And they're running into these political protests, and that's just driving them faster in there rather than really impacting them to think, just to pause for a minute and think of what they're doing.
Right.
So he developed this whole thing of like, well, I want to train people to do sidewalk counseling. So for a whole couple of years, he was doing sidewalk counseling with the team. We saw some amazing results. I could tell you stories of just the one lady going in. He said, are you getting an abortion? She looked down. She didn't want to look up. And he goes, well, why are you getting an abortion? Why are you doing this? And she said, well, we've got 3 kids. We live in one room apartment. We have no room. I can't do anything. And he said, well, don't get an abortion. We'll help you. And he got her information. She decided to keep the baby. The ladies in the church put a shower together for this woman. And when she was loaded with all these gifts, 2 weeks later, her weight on low-income housing came through. We helped her move. We got her set up. And she was going home in tears and said, I didn't know people like you existed. And that's how I envisioned pro-life ministry. Mm-hmm. So then we came across an organization that actually produced mobile units, Save the Storks. I thought, well, why don't we get one?
When you say a mobile unit, what do you mean by that?
A mobile medical unit that actually drives right outside these abortion clinics. Now, you guys are not a sanctuary state like we are. In other words, these clinics are like thriving, and they're bringing people even from out of state. You guys don't have that, but unfortunately, you have this ubiquitous abortion pill, which anybody can get delivered to their door in 24 hours, and it terminates the life of that child in the womb. And even when we talk about conception, that actually has been redefined in the Webster's Dictionary. They redefined the word conception to mean when the egg gets planted in the uterus. And the truth is, life begins at fertilization. If you ever get a chance to go to the display in Kentucky at the Creation Museum, there's an amazing display that actually shows, and I actually verified this, when that egg and that sperm come together, there's a little flash of photon energy, light.
I've seen that.
It's pretty profound, the technology they use to do that. It's really like striking. But there's a
little shell game there about when most people say conception, they mean that's what they mean is the minute it's a fertilization. But it's you see a lot of that in this world where we're going to parse hairs and conception, but not fertilization. Even though the average person saying conception includes that,
right?
And we're trying to say when the life comes alive, then it's a person, it's a soul.
And this is what really struck me is that. Because I saw the rancorous debates and I said, no, we can't do that. I saw the sidewalk counseling and then the opportunity to do this mobile thing. We went from reaching about 12 to 15 babies a year, saving that, and a few ladies who received the Lord, because it was evangelistic too, to about, right now we're projected to have about 450 babies a year in our 2 units and about 120 professions of faith. So it has profoundly been amazing.
When you say 450 babies, you mean that mothers that were on their way to get abortions that changed their minds?
See, that's the thing. Pregnancy centers are amazing. They're reaching abortion vulnerable women, but abortion-minded women are at the door. Their baby's going to be dead in an hour. They're not even thinking about any other option. They don't even know another option exists. And then we intercept them, and then we offer a free ultrasound. They come on board. 80% of the women keep their baby. Now, you don't have the clinics here, so your pregnancy centers are a great way to get the word out to people, because now your real challenge here in this state is to make it visible so that women know there's another option,
right? And
that it's not to be afraid, because most of the people that are on the thing is either they can't afford it, they already have too many children, or they're too young, they think, and their life is over. And the wild thing is you come alongside them and you help them with other resources, and that's where a pregnancy center comes in. They've got so many resources. Well, they would have a lot more resources if people gave generously to them, which is why I'm here, because I want to see people catch that vision. And I can't describe to you when I was holding a 2-day-old baby in my hands at a church service that was kept 2 days. That the lady that we were ministering to, she was going to give the child up for an adoption, but something happened. Someone sent me a picture of the father of the child holding the baby. And I said to somebody, they're not giving the child up now. And sure enough, they bond to that child, and now they're doing amazing. But I'm holding this little baby, and I'm wondering, could this be the next Moses? God, when he gives life, man's word says, oh, they can't take care of it. Oh, it's going to be worse. Oh, what kind of a life will that child have? And that's just foolishness. God is wise. And not just that child, but I wonder the thousands of people that child will impact. And the thousands of people, those thousands, tens of thousands that child might impact. We have no idea. Now, some will say, well, they could also turn out to be bad. Well, this is true in anything, but God is a giver of life. And where there's life, there's hope.
Yeah, it always makes me so sad and infuriating, too, when you hear people say things along the lines of, so what, you just want the child to be born poor? As if being born into poverty is worse than dying and not existing at all.
Get rid of Abraham Lincoln. He was born poor.
How many wonderful, amazing people, and the patronizing attitude, because obviously the person saying that doesn't think that they themselves are poor, because they're up above everybody else. And this has always been kind of the way, even going, you want to go back to like Lenin and guys like that. It's like these poor, ignorant, stupid poor people. They shouldn't even have to live. But and it's not. Sometimes it's been said with vitriol, like their life are useless and they're pointless. But now it's like it's presented under this facade of compassion that, well, what if he's going to be born, has to be on food stamps? And I sit there like, I was on food stamps, like, with my kids were on food stamps. Are you saying they shouldn't have been alive? And that's not what anybody intends to say, but that's what you're saying.
But the point is, it's a very clear picture. It's kind of like, even creation, evolution. You got man's word and you got God's word. And when even Christians look at this, like when I shared the story, I was driving the unit that day, providing security. The intake people were getting the women over there, and the young couple from Guatemala came over, illegal immigrants. Her boyfriend, they'd taken an Uber to the clinic. She was, I think, 15, he was 17. And so they came over, got on the unit, and when they came off, they were smiling ear to ear. And I heard the story was that when they saw the baby on the screen, they heard the heartbeat. That young man, and by the way, men are the number one reason why women get abortions, because they're not supportive. But when that young man, 80% of the women who see that baby keep it, but 100% keep it when the man, the father of the child, comes aboard.
100%.
100%.
So you've never had a couple see the ultrasound and then go back into that abortion clinic?
Never.
Wow.
Because there's something that happens. Well, this young man, 17 years of age, said to her, I know your parents won't let us get married right now, but I'm going to work 2 jobs. I'm going to save some money. This is our family.
That's a man.
She got so happy, this little girl, 15 years old. I mean, someone would say, oh, what can happen? Well, I had a Christian woman when I shared this story at our church, came up and said, well, Pastor, I'm a teacher and I just have a hard time. How's that 15-year-old going to, her whole life is over. And I'm thinking, what are you saying? That she should have went through with the abortion? No, I'm not really saying that, but, well, yeah, you are. I didn't say that, but the reality is we think through human wisdom and we make decisions like that. And then there's the after effect when women choose abortion. Here's where pastors they need to be encouraged. You've got to talk more about this. This is a very real situation. But so many pastors are afraid of hurting the feelings of women that have had abortions, or parents who've pushed their kids into having abortions. They don't want to offend. And I say, the reality is a lot of those women that are living with this grief and this pain and this shame, that's so powerful, they don't want anybody to know they had an abortion. My own wife, before we got married, before she was a Christian, she had a couple of abortions, and that's what broke her. And she found herself in Calvary Chapel, and she was crying out to God, and her boyfriend was not interested in the things of God at all. And we met, and one thing led to another, and eventually we got married. And she never told me until we got married. It was so painful for her, and I said, honey, I would have loved to share that burden with you. Look, the women need to unburden themselves, and I've seen great stories of women that have been freed by just confessing their sin. And maybe they didn't know fully what they were doing. You'd be surprised, how God frees them up. So we also have post-abortive counseling as well.
We've done that here at the church. We had a group, the Abortion Recovery of Alabama, which to my experience, has been a great ministry, and they do post-abortion care with counseling with these ladies. And what I found was amazing that one of the ladies that was there was what you would expect. She was in her early to mid 20s, I would expect. She was single, had a career, and didn't want to do that. And she went to the counseling. The other woman was probably, I would guess, in her 40s or 50s with teenage or grown children. It's something she had done years ago. And I think that's a great representation of having to carry that with you. And they told us that they had a hard time finding a church to sponsor them, to actually host the event, the graduation, which I didn't blink. I was like, what I said was, are you sure you want to do it here? Because it's kind of a small church, and it's not an aesthetically appealing church maybe for something like that. And because I know, people think about things like that, and like, well, no one else really wants to do it. And I was like, that's really heartbreaking to me.
You know what it is? Look, I can understand my hesitation was because of the rancorous political expression of it. The signs, the gory, beaten, the ripped apart children, and, murder. And this is what women have seen. And that is not the portrayal I believe that the Lord wants. From a political side, fine. But when it comes to women making that decision, if I were to ever hold a sign out in front of an abortion clinic, it would be the same phrase that I told my sister years ago when she told me she was thinking of an abortion. And I said, well, why? You'd be a great mom. And that stuck with her.
I'm going to steal that.
She, my sign would be, you would make a great mom. Because they're thinking how hard it's going to be. They know it's not easy. They know it's going to be a tough road. And that's why they're making the easy choice. But if they made the tough choice, they would do what it takes to protect that child and raise that child and to find purpose. And there's what's missing, even in the church, is to see purpose in that which maybe the world would not measure it up. But don't we get sized up all the time? How handsome you are, you get sized up in the world. How intelligent you are, you get sized up. How strong you are, your personality. And if you don't have those things, then they kind of put you in the lower shelf. But God doesn't measure us that way. And if we could see ourselves from God's perspective and see those children, the potential that is there, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important what you're talking about, Pastor Lloyd, because I feel like I see there being a division on a lot of issues like this in the church. I see some pastors who like you said, maybe they will come in and they're so gung-ho about these issues to the point that maybe sometimes the way that they choose to pursue them, it feels more political than pastoral.
Right.
You kind of feel like, well, you're most excited when you're, out in the street yelling at somebody or parroting the same things that we see on cable news. And I think we all know that that's, Tyler and I have talked about this all the time. That's not what we feel biblically is the best way to go about things. But I also feel that there are some pastors who they shrink back from these things because they say, well, I don't want to
be that.
I don't want to get too political.
Right.
I don't want to get. That's controversial. I don't want to. I want to stick to preaching the gospel. And I've said those things before in my life as I've tried to develop these things in my mind and understand what the Lord would have us do. I've kind of gone with that line of, well, I believe in preaching the gospel. Now, I don't want to take away from that. I do believe that. We've been talking about this. Even today, I just recently taught a quick sermon for the church on Philemon, and Paul believed in preaching the gospel to handle social issues. But what you're talking about is that when we teach the gospel, it also requires us to, in some way, be the hands and feet of Jesus and be out there loving the people that are impacted by these issues. How do you balance that for yourself and your congregation?
If we don't share the gospel with these women, then we are just a social organization. So that is our priority. And I will tell you this, 10 years ago, if you would have asked me that I could put pro-life and evangelism in the same sentence, I would have laughed at you. There's no way, considering the pro-life demonstrations that I saw. But now I understand it is one of the most evangelistic ministries we have. So many women respond to the gospel, get plugged into church. This beautiful couple that took an abortion pill who called us immediately because the hotline, we're on the hotline registry. We have a doctor that can prescribe the reversal pill. Within 3 hours, they had a reversal pill in their hands from the time they called.
Yeah, and that's a good note for everybody to hear that I think you said 70% of abortions now are through the pill.
That's important here in this state because that's where they're going to get their abortions.
Right. And there is a recovery pill or a reversal pill that you can take that will, if you take within 48 hours, I believe, that will undo what the first one did.
Yep.
So we need to just know that fact so that when you come across those situations, you are armed with that information.
This was a backslidden couple. They were both married before, had children from previous marriages. She got pregnant and they panicked. We can't have any more children. She took the pill and then immediately realized what she did was wrong. So they called and we got them connected. They got the pill reversal. They came in for a scan, an ultrasound, and the baby was fine, still growing. I got to witness that baby that came to the church, the whole family, all the little kids. They couldn't have been happier. The man was like saying, more people need to know our story. He was not trying to hide what he did. He wanted everybody to know the mistake they made so that others wouldn't make that same mistake. And they were so thankful, and they're both plugged into church. They're in a New Believers ministry now. They're thriving. Their kids are growing in our children's church. It's evangelistic.
Yeah. And that's somebody that comes to this situation, there has a profound experience with the grace of God on day one.
Yeah.
That person's never going, well, they may struggle, but that guy's never going to wonder, well, what about this thing can God forgive that? Or what about if I do this over here? Can God forgive? It's like, well, if God can forgive this, he can forgive anything. And these people at the church who are willing to love us and take us in, and Zach and I did youth ministry together forever, and we would have moments where I would open it up for the kids to publicly in a prayer meeting confess their sins. And I mean, kids would throw the real deal out there about these things, but I never once saw anybody get ostracized or pushed to the side. What you'd get a bunch of people coming around and hugging on them, and I have an eating disorder, I've been cutting myself, I watch pornography, and just to watch the body of Christ come around them. And that's what happens. And then for those of you that might be listening that have had abortions, or you paid for an abortion, or you stepped out while your girlfriend took care of had an abortion when you should have been there, there's grace and forgiveness for you. There is grace that Jesus died on the cross for. And we as a church, we need to not be afraid. Jesus certainly wasn't, to be seen as approving the things that we're offering grace for. Jesus would spend time with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. We kind of forget that Jesus had a bunch of harlots following him around. And they didn't like that about him. But Jesus was not, of course, soliciting these prostitutes or making money with the tax collectors. He was giving them the gospel. Right. And he was not worried about how it would be perceived, because he's like, I don't approve what they do. You might think that I do, but they need this grace more than I need your approval. And that's got to be our attitude is, well, you can't let somebody testify about abortion in church. People are going to think that we're okay with abortion. And it's like, but we're not. And everybody knows that we're not. And we can't be intimidated by that attitude or that threat, because that is such a profound demonstration of grace to the body, both of grace for forgiveness, but also grace of how we treat one another.
Absolutely. This is a great ministry. I would have never imagined it to be so profoundly impacting on families. And let me say this. People say, well, isn't that very expensive? I mean, you have to have a doctor's license on there. You got to have a nurse, an ultrasound tech. The unit itself is very expensive. And I would say, first off, it's not cheap. It's very expensive. It cost us nothing from our church budget. Because there's a lot of people out there passionate about this that really, maybe they have it in their past. People that go to these pro-life seminars and they want to find ministries rescuing babies. We had people donate to us just as tests, to see what you're going to do with it. And when they saw the numbers coming in of babies rescued and lives being saved, they upped their donations. And the resources were there. But here's the thing, in your state here, with the change, you don't have the rancorous stuff that we have to contend with in New Jersey, and the drug companies that are literally putting ads out directly against pregnancy centers and what we're doing. But you have a unique situation, and I think a lot of the resources, if people have been donating to pro-life, stop doing it because, well, Roe v. Wade solved it. it didn't. The abortion pill is huge. And that same amount of resource that might have been helping people come away from the clinic now needs to be marketing in a way where you need to let people know of the options.
We're still there to help.
I want to see a billboard. Someone that's listening here in Alabama, get a billboard up there saying, tested positive, ? Positive choices.
Boom.
Free ultrasound, free
go.
testing,
Yeah,
we'll
that.
come along.
Yeah.
Someone's got to build that billboard
Well,
and put it around town.
The common accusation that pro-lifers get is you're not pro-life, you're just anti-abortion. And it's a straw man. It's ridiculous. Why don't you adopt babies? Never mind that Christians adopt like all the babies and are all the foster parents, right?
Right.
But we need to make sure that that's not true of us, because pro-life ministry means not just preventing abortion. Pro-life ministry means we are still serving these people, these girls, these families, these kids that have no other recourse. That need hasn't gone away.
Bam.
We've eliminated the bad option, but we need to, now is the time to be strengthening the good option. And yes, it's great that Roe v. Wade was overturned, and we should celebrate that all the time.
Yeah.
But man, this isn't over.
No.
If it's over, that's a great time for somebody to come in and say, see, they never cared about you, which is simply not true.
People knew that it's not about making abortion illegal as much as it's making abortion unthinkable.
Right.
And pro-life isn't just, they'll accuse us, you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. No, when you're pro-life, you really are there for the woman. And you understand that, you're not giving her a few diapers and saying, good luck with it, I hope it works out. You're coming alongside her. In fact, when we have showers for these women that keep their babies, and we have all kinds of resources we pour in them, we also want a relationship with them. We want to get them plugged into church. We want to encourage them to make some better life choices. We'll pull them into some retreat or some area, or we'll give them some opportunities, in our thrift store to work and provide and give some dignity. There's all kinds of things that people pool together to bring that family in. And man, that's so rewarding. So rewarding.
What a wonderful example too of, this was one of the reasons why this ministry was on, Tyler, I know it was on your heart from very early on here at the church. We were wondering, how can we do something about this? How can we get involved? And one of the reasons is we always said, look, these are the things that we get upset about online. And I'm saying we, like I get online and I see these things that you just makes you're so angry and you're so heartbroken about these things. And it's so easy for that to be as far as it goes. Just how dare they, and what is going on with this world?
Yeah, you kind of virtue signal, like I'm mad.
Yeah.
And I used to say being a Christian is not just being mad about all the right things.
Right. And and you say the state of the family and the state of the this and well, what better way to actually do something about that than what you're describing with this? I just come back to that story of the young man and the young woman. Like you there in that moment, the Lord is welding a family together under Jesus Christ, and the church gets to be a part of that. There's no better way for you to be on the front lines of fixing the state of the family in our country than to be there with those people, helping them realize that it's possible to obey the Lord and be a family. And what how many of us have seen this happen in our churches, that you see the Lord just grab some family, and the ripple effects that happen from that are going to keep going.
There's a little rabbit trail maybe we can go on. Zach, I know you're familiar with this. Pastor Lloyd, I don't know if you would be so much, but if you want to talk about what's commonly called the manosphere online, where you talk about guys like Andrew Tate or Fresh and Fit or the Whatever podcast, and these guys that talk a lot about how usually from a very male perspective, it's that the way that the sexuality is being handled in America and in the West is just messed up, and it's unfairly leveraged against men, and women are too promiscuous, and men are getting left behind, and all that. One of the things that's often missed in that is the call to what the ideal is.
Right.
And what people forget is when you separate sex from family and from fatherhood and from procreation, just basically enough, then we have these podcasts that go on, and it's like they have so much good to say, but they don't make the final solution, where they're like, yeah, you guys need to stop being so promiscuous. It's not fair. It's not right. And you're shaming yourselves. But then you can't also come over here and say, and it's just a man's way to sleep around. And that's just what men do. It's like, no. But you tell that story. I love that, because that's a boy becoming a man in that van, right? In that mobile unit. And that's what fatherhood is supposed to do to you is, and this is back when people would get married much younger. It wasn't wait until you get grown up and then you get married. And that's kind of the advice that's often given in that world, is go make your money, go get your life, because you'll never be able to attract the kind of woman you want until you have a bunch of money anyway. when the way the Lord seemed to have set it up is more along the lines of, this process will grow you up.
Yes.
You being together, holding a little you in your arms, and you're like, man, I still play video games. I'm supposed to take care of this little guy. And that's so important, and it's all of a unit. It can't just be, I mean, Zach, about this. You can't just take it apart piecemeal. You have to have the whole thing in place.
And that's the thing that I think, this is why I want to encourage, maybe if you're listening and this stuff intimidates you and you're a pastor and you're like, or you're involved in a ministry and you're like, oh, how could we do this? Like, you can't, you have no option to not do this or something like this in your church. And why am I saying that? Well, because Tyler, I know you and I have found all the time, and Pastor Lloyd, I'm sure you would go along with this. Every time that you meet people where they're at in the middle of the mess that sin is making in their life, the Lord uses it and it totally changes their life, the lives of people around you. You can't afford to just look the other way and say, that's messy, I'd better not. Do you remember when we used to do youth ministry, and we did, one time the Lord just gave us this idea. He said, what if we do a conference for the kids about biblical masculinity and femininity? And we did breakouts, we did workshops, and we thought, this will be fun. We'll see.
That was so much fun, man.
We said, we'll see. It'll be whatever. We'll just try it. I'll never forget, 15 minutes after we did a breakout with just the guys, we did these single gender breakouts, and I did a breakout with just the guys, and I had kids coming up to me that I knew their dad was in the picture, their family was broken up, and they're coming up to me asking, and I said, we'll answer some questions. We answered some questions, and afterwards all the guys came up to me, and the guys asked me, how do I shave? How do you tie a tie? How do you ask a girl out? What about jobs, and like
we did handshake practice. Remember that?
Yes,
we did handshake practice with all the boys.
And I remember, because I was at the time, I think we were married, and I literally came away like just wanting to cry. And you realize that you were being able to be a part of these young guys growing up in life and in the Lord, and seeing that there was a way to be a godly Christian man, that there was a way to be a godly Christian woman. Well, that you can't, like you said, you can't have that apart from, and here's a way to have a godly Christian family. And if just because your life is in a place where you haven't had that perfect, road to that doesn't mean the Lord's done with you. And certainly the church is not done with you. And so what a wonderful way to step into those messes that the enemy makes and be able to be part of just grace and the Lord building something.
And the lie of abortion, and Pastor Lloyd, I know you hear this all the time, you must, that is, it's always about, the people that are impoverished, or the people that are, don't have anything, or the life of the mother, and what about incest, and what about rape? And that's where the conversation always goes, to the extremes. But really, to not to put any shame on the people that actually deal with this, but where the discourse is had about why this ought to stay legal and be legal and all the time, so much for safe, legal, and rare, like that's well over. Right. What it essentially amounts to is, we want to be able to have sex whenever and however we want with no consequences.
Yeah.
And the culture that builds that fractures, because you're missing out on the purpose for all these things that the Lord gave us in the first place.
Women have been deceived in this one too. The reality is, my grandmother used to have a saying, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? Mm-hmm. Why make a commitment in marriage when you can be satisfied? And of course, this isn't just in sex as well as pornography and self-pleasing. Right. But the reality is, God has given man this incredible sexual drive and energy that needs to be channeled. And we used to be that if you wanted to have a fulfillment in that area of your life, you had to become education. You had to get your education, right, so that you could get employment, so that you could then provide for a wife. Mm-hmm. And then you had to learn how to treat a woman and respect. And you had to earn the privilege of having that oxytocin flood in your brain while you're married.
Right.
Well, that always gave a great foundation for family and the security. And we have lost that now, where men can please themselves and they don't need to be married. They can be with their girlfriend. They don't need to get married. They don't need to make a commitment. They can still be boys. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem right now. Boys aren't growing up. I talked to my grandson. He's 17. He's almost 17. And I said, you're only 3 years away from when your grandmother got married to me. And I said, I think it's about time you think about what it means to be a man. And I love what you're talking about, those little things, how to look somebody in the eye when you're shaking their hand, how to present yourself. These are things that boys need to learn. They should be learning it from their fathers. Yeah. When there's a fatherlessness, then the church can step in. But
right. That conference that we did, we had so much fun. We ended up doing, my wife led a session for the boys only, I led a session for the girls only, and then we would swap. Because we wanted, we did these, called them AMAs. It's from Reddit, and Ask Me Anything. Like, you guys can ask me any question about boys or men or how we think or the way things go. Same thing and we just had the best time. But I mean, the questions that were being asked and the answers they were getting. And we came back and so many of the girls, I'll use the girls as an example. We heard this too, but they were asking my wife, can we have an event where you teach us how to bake cookies? Can you have an event where you show us how to stitch and sew and make quilts and how to, seriously.
Very base, very trad.
Right, very base. Yeah. We come back and one of the moms came up to me and she was like, what's her name came back and she wants to learn how to cook. And I was like, yeah, she does. She goes, I never thought kids today wanted to learn those things. And dads come to like, yeah, he's came back and he asked me to, learn how to change the oil in the car. And he's like, I didn't think he wanted to, he just wanted to sit there and play his video games. So there's a sense too of its expectations being put on this next generation. And I wasn't there, but from what I'm able to tell, there was a great, youth rebellion in the, the 60s, 70s, 80s. Like, no, you can't tell me anything, even in like the 90s with the whole grunge thing, like the rebellious Bart Simpson kind of thing. That's over. Or there's other kinds of rebellion, but like people are now, they go online and they Google how to do things and they find dads online and they find moms online. And it's the church. This is where the church should live. And the abortion is all a part of this because it's a symptom of this same thing where you remove God's design for what a family should be, a marriage should be, parenthood should be. And you wonder, well, wait a minute, why are the men not growing up? And you just kind of said it like the engine that God made to help them grow up has been removed.
That's right.
And I'm sometimes out of compassion. Well, we were so young, and they shouldn't have to do that when they're so young. And it's like, yeah, they should, because that's the adventure. They need that, just like you needed that.
You got 30-year-old young men living in the basement of their parents' house playing video games, and parents enabling them. They pretty much handicap their boy when they do that. Yes. I basically told parents, I said, when he's 18, you got to have a vehicle for him to get out the house. And he's got to make it on his own. And I love this thought. I had a guy on our board years ago who made it big in the financial world in D.C., and he was handling clients' money who were worth $250 million. It was crazy. But he said all those clients, their kids were a mess. They had so much money, they could get whatever they want, and their lives were ruined. He said there was one exception, one guy worth $200 million. He told his children, he goes, I'm not going to give you a penny for college. I will not deprive you of the privilege of making it on your own. And they all became successful, where all these other kids were on drugs, in rehab, messed up, divorced 3 or 4 times. But his kids, successful, working hard, raising families. And the difference is that men need to learn how to be a man.
Yeah.
And that is one of the big issues in regard to why there's such an abortion crisis. Because they're not being men. And you know what? I was one of those jerks. When I got my girlfriend pregnant, or at least she told me she was pregnant, and I told her this. This was the classic line. This is what we do at 17. Well, what are you going to do about it? It's like, it's your problem, and I can't have a kid. And so 2 weeks later, she said it was a false alarm. And to this day, I don't know if she was just telling me that because she didn't want to lose me, or whether she really, she had an abortion. I don't know. But the point is, that is the callousness of a self-centered young man, and I was at that age. I didn't have a dad. But thankfully, by the mercy of God, God gave me some spiritual mentors. And
that's what the church is for. We talk a lot about society and how the village is gone, right? But that's what the church is.
That's
you
right.
Get older people and younger people together, and they all, I'll tell our folks all the time, older folks, don't be afraid to talk to these young guys. Like, they don't want to hear it. Who cares? They first of all, they do. Yeah. And second of all, they need to hear it. And
this even transmits to even the racial issue, because we think of the battle, or the racial divide. And I told our congregation, we have a mix of everyone from New York. I said, we can show the world how to be a family. Yeah. I said the reality is, it's not so much of a racial issue as it is a lazy issue. I said the truth is that it's a lot easier to hang out with people just like you.
Yeah.
And that's what typically we do. And we see that in schools, people get in cliques, they hang out with people just like them. I said because they do that, they don't know how to relate with other people. So they get in their little isolated group. So we always as a church go, look, this is a time to step outside your comfort zone. Get to know somebody from a different ethnic background. I believe there's only one race. It's the human race.
Right.
But get somebody from another background or economic strata and develop friendships. In fact, my ideal home group you've got an older couple, you've got, a college student, you've got a young family, you've got somebody that came out of prison, you've got somebody from totally different ethnic background. And man, the things you learn from people that are different from you, this is where you learn how to love. When you just get a group of just like you, you're just loving yourself because they're just like you.
Yeah.
I said, you don't need, I tell people, I said, if you're hanging around with people just like you, believe me, you do not need more you.
Right.
You need to step out and love.
That's why I've found that a lot of the people that speak the loudest on the racial issue are sometimes the people that are the most racially isolated. It's like the people that, for example, I'll just pick on them. Portland and Seattle were the ones that were burning the city down during the Black Lives Matter riots. And they're like some of the whitest cities in the country. And I think that stems from some of that because you're like, you might have your own guilt and your own, I don't know anybody.
That's what it is.
What's the rest of the people doing? And around here, we've got our issues and our struggles, but it's like Birmingham is 50-50, black and white. And then, other races as well, but mostly just black and white. And, there's tension, but people just kind of, you have to get along. If you're going to live here, you're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have a neighborhood with different kinds of people. You're going to work with different kinds of people. You're going to grocery shop with different kinds of people.
Look, I'm not going to minimize the past and the evil of slavery. I'm not going to minimize the past of Jim Crow. I'm not going to minimize any of that stuff because that was all egregiously wrong.
Sure.
But we are in a different era now where we can, as a church, show people how to love God's people of all different shades because we're all brown, just different shades.
Yeah, let's show them, right? That's what we do. We don't need, I like to say, we don't need somebody else to show us how to love. So to bring it back here for just a couple more minutes to the abortion thing, you mentioned some of the opposition that y'all have faced up there. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? You mentioned even the drug companies, but you're up. Do you do a lot of your ministry in New York City or is it down in Jersey?
We don't have. We're working on getting some expression in New York City. We need to have separate things, but there are certain laws. Look, there's a lot of training. You have to go through. People that do the sidewalk counseling, that is, they meet the people just before they go in the clinic and get them over on the bus. There's like a 6-hour training to make the most of 6 seconds. That's about the length of time you have before they go in the clinic. And there's a lot of investment of time. But we had our unit hijacked at one point down in Trenton where our driver walked away for a little bit to get some coffee. And a guy saw a thing running. He jumped in and he started taking off, not knowing there was a woman being scanned in the back.
Oh, my goodness.
And she ended up keeping her baby, by the way. It was like, wow, it was amazing. But as soon as he heard the screams and realized there were people in there, he pulled over and then jumped out because he didn't want to get caught for kidnapping. But that was kind of a little bit of a scare. We learned some things on that. It's needful for security.
Stay in the car.
There's a particular town that took pictures of our unit, and they wrote this whole article in their town about these fake abortion clinics, and they never bothered to ask us about what we did, who we were, but they just took all of their talking points from Planned Parenthood. And typically that's what media does. It's like it's more propaganda than anything. You can tell by the way it's written that there's no alternative view here. It's like just the attack. But you know what? The point is you just keep loving people and keep doing it. Here's the thing. There's no amount of guilt. When they get on the unit and they see that baby on the screen, they find it, and then the heartbeat comes through. All the nurse says, "So what are you thinking?" And the tears start flowing. "This is my baby." It's amazing the impact.
Yeah.
That really makes a difference. Makes a difference.
That's wonderful. And even as the way they phrase fake abortion clinic, it's silly. I mean, that you're not tricking anybody. And if somebody really wanted an abortion, if you find that this place doesn't actually give abortions, you'd just get up and you'd leave. Like you'd go find another one.
Oh, but I got that line here in town.
Yeah, somebody said that to you. This is one of those fake.
Yeah, and I was really surprised actually because again, like you've mentioned, there's a big difference, I think, Pastor Lloyd, in some ways, between where you guys are doing this sort of ministry and the things that we encounter here. Because again, here in Alabama, there's differing culture things, differing legalities. But we were passing out flyers for an event that Positive Choices was doing. I went to a business. I had my little daughter with me. She was barely old enough to even understand what was going on with this conversation. I handed this gentleman a flyer. It's a business that I'd been before, and they had posted flyers for us before. So I said, would you mind putting this up? And he said, well, what is it? He took a look at it, and he said he all but threw it, back in my face. And he gets this terrible look on his face. And he said, this is one of those things that lies to young women and tells them that they, offer abortion. He said, get this out. He said some stuff to me, and and then I took my little daughter and, walked out of the shop, and she goes, Daddy, he was very mad. I said, yes, he was.
Wow.
And what I took away from that was amazing is you could see in a moment that he switched from an interaction that we were having to, like you said, a programmed message that he'd been handed from somewhere.
Right.
You weren't talking anymore.
No, we weren't talking anymore. He was just spitting out this programmed thing that he'd been told, this is what this is. Now, he didn't have any idea. First of all, that's not what Positive Choices does. They're very clear in all their messaging. I've looked at it. There's no subterfuge here. There's no big conspiracy. So he just made a bunch of assumptions. But what really made me sad was the intense anger that it was an instant reaction from him. And it wasn't something I was expecting, because again, most folks down here are pretty, they're pretty okay with what we're doing.
Even if they're pro-choice, they're going to be like, but you know what, I appreciate what y'all are doing.
Sure, that's
usually
wild.
what you hear.
I would respond to somebody like that to say, listen, if I thought, or if I was doing what you think I'm doing, I'd be as angry as you too. Because no one should ever be lied to, put on the spot.
Right.
Don't assume that's what we do. Don't assume that's what we do, because I would agree with you. I'd be angry too. But your anger at us right now, you may not understand what we really do. I would be happy to inform you what we do if you're willing to listen. But, those are hard people. I mean, I like to take that energy they have and actually compliment them on their passion for what they think is right, but then correct them in any area they're wrong.
Well, even if you see these men on the street things, which I can only watch so many of these before I start, kind of like you have an argument with yourself in the shower. If I was there, here's what I would do. But they all say the same 4 or 5 things, and they all think that they're winning. It's like, but like we've never heard that one before. And this happens in all sorts of domains, not just related to abortion. But it's amazing how it kind of is transitioning to now from, at least for y'all, where it says not we want the right to offer abortions, to where now it's like you have to offer an abortion or you're not acting in good faith. But which is so bizarre and so strange that when you think of it that way, but there's a lot of money involved in that. There's a lot of corruption involved in that, I'm sure too. So
the reality is you got a young woman with a tough choice to make. She's afraid. She's told by these people who quote unquote empower women, oh, your life is over. Oh, you can't do this. You can't do this. Oh, you can't do this. You're too young. You can't. And we come along and say, no, you can.
Yeah.
And we'll be here to help you and encourage you. And one day you're going to look back and see what God did with that little life, and you're going to be so happy. There's going to be others that will have a world of regret for that life that they know was there and they terminated it. And I want to help women not make that mistake because I care about the women, not just the baby.
And there's a war on a whole other thing we could talk about. There's a war on guilt. Like no one should ever feel guilty for anything, because even if you bring up but what about these poor people that go through this? Well, the only reason they feel guilty is because you made them feel guilty.
That's what they think.
It's so bizarre. And
right,
there's no resemblance to what we actually do.
The cool thing is, if people heard this, they might not know that of the women who keep their baby, unsolicited, they send us their pictures of their baby, profusely thanking us. I've got hundreds of pictures of babies from families that were saying, you were there at a point in our life where we were just about ready to make the biggest mistake of our life. Look at our little beautiful baby that's here because of you. Thank you for being there. They are elated that we were in the gap. And that tells you that they felt they had no choice. We gave them a choice. They're thankful. We're really pro-choice, because the abortion clinics are not. They've got one thing in mind: get money off of your sorrow or your mistakes, and they don't really care about you.
No. Let's go. Yeah.
There may be some that do because they think they're doing right, like an Abby Johnson. She thought she was doing something good until she actually saw an abortion, and she saw that baby trying to live, escape that instrument that was trying to kill it, and that really changed her life because she saw.
Yeah, I remember that.
So let's follow the science. They always say follow the science. Follow that science.
Yeah, well, we had a whole podcast on that already, the science versus the science. So as we kind of bring this section of the conversation to a close here, we have our fundraiser tonight. But my call as a pastor is churches, it's great that you're sympathetic with these kinds of ministries, but I really would encourage you and challenge you to get involved find a way to serve and support.
Yeah.
I mean, just about every pregnancy center in America can be hard up for money and for volunteers and for just the need for help. And I'll tell you, I will be so proud that for the rest of my life, I'll be able to say we were doing pro-life ministry before Roe versus Wade was overturned. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is on the level of combating slavery. And I mean, no disrespect to anybody that takes that personally, but the church were the abolitionists. They were out in the front, taking it on the chin until the culture changed and there was a war and all the rest. You know the story. But it's like, if you could go back then and be a pastor, knowing what you know now, wouldn't you just be desperate to be on the front lines of the abolition movement, knowing what God was going to do? Right. I feel like it's the same thing for us. It's like, if you could go back in time to, you know, having a church in 2015 to about 2020, wouldn't you want to be on the front lines of this, to be able to see this evil begin to be washed away? And we can get real pessimistic, and me too, but you know, the Lord is not done. Until we've been called home, the Lord is not done. And when I was at Liberty, Zach, you went to Liberty too, they talk, which of course very pro-life group there too, but Jerry Falwell used to often talk about one of the things that was a good, appropriate goal for a Christian man was to get a good job, make a ton of money, and then he would say, finance the kingdom. And I used to think that was so crass, and I was so, you know, I was 18, I knew everything. But then you get, like you're talking about, these people that have the ability to write these checks and supply the needs, that have the spiritual gift of giving, which is biblical, that if you're out there and you're one of those people, how do I help? Then maybe consider financing the kingdom where you live and helping the people that are doing a good job with it. So, well, let's pivot here just for our remaining time. And Pastor Lloyd, you serve on the, I guess it's called the Leadership Council for the Calvary Chapel Association. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about what that entails, what that involves, and kind of where things stand for us as a movement right now. And maybe we'll have this discussion until we come to the end of our time.
Well, you know, if I could have predicted after Chuck Smith passed what would have happened to the Calvary Chapel movement, I would have thought, honestly, it would have splintered in a dozen different ways. You know, Horizon, Harvest, Calvary, you know, this group, that group, because Chuck had a way of unifying a lot of us together that had different takes on the way ministry should be done. And but one thing was certain, the distinctives of the Word of God, dependence on the Spirit, that would have stood out. Well, the amazing thing is Chuck had such an influence without control. So he didn't control the movement, but he influenced it. And to me, that's like in a marriage, a husband who tries to control his wife, he's going to lose influence. But if he has influence, he doesn't need to control. And I believe that Chuck modeled that. So I believe that the council decided this is how we wanted to do this. Instead of being a central office in which we become a denomination and we're dictating to the rest of the group how it should be, we want to set the example. And so our conferences usually are, the main conference, the international conference, is really us just ministering the word, enjoying fellowship. This is what we are. It's a fellowship of churches. We have commonality in those things that Chuck modeled for us. But there are, you know, some of the younger guys that you know, I put them in the level of, you know, they didn't have the first century conviction. They're the children of the first century conviction, and they have belief, but and so it's interesting because then you get so focused on belief and theology and all that sort of thing, you can also lose sight of that first century or that first generation conviction. So this next generation, you know, the challenge is just they want to talk and argue theology, but there's something missing. And by the time it gets to that third generation, it's just going to be kaput, you know, opinion. So what our goal is to keep modeling, you know, the impact. And what's encouraging to me is that Calvary Chapel Association, since Chuck passed, there are over 1,000 new Calvary Chapels. So God has
We're one of them.
multiplied it. He's multiplied it, and it's still there. So there was the little bit of a skirmish. There was the split. I don't know if you can call it a split,
kind of
a splinter.
Yeah.
There have been people that have, you know, decided to follow, you know, the church that was turned over to, you know, Chuck Smith's relative. But it's as a modeling of ministry, it's not, the church itself is dried up. But yet God is blessing His Word. He's blessing the principles that we got from Chuck, and they're biblical. I mean, who would have thought that let's just teach through the Scriptures? that would make a difference. So all of this to say is that the council is there, and how we're set up as an organization is to be an example and serve what I would say the regions. So there's lots of different regions where churches are growing. There's all over the world, Africa, there's South America, Europe. In fact, just in the last year, I've been to each one of those regions, meeting with some regional leaders and seeing God's continuing the work. Here in the States, there's a number of regions, and so you're in your region.
The Deep South region.
You're in the Deep South area. You guys have your own conference, and you guys are really overseeing this region. This is your region. So that to us is the way it should be, decentralized leadership. We're going to continue to, when these guys that are in their 70s and getting close to 80s on the council, we've already got a whole generation, probably I think about 4 or 5 other guys right now in their 40s and 50s that are coming on. And that's what they were going to do. It's not going to be, there's no about exercising control. The only decision power we really have is, and even the regions decide who's going to be a Calvary or not the organization, not CCA. We pick who's going to, we pick the every 2 years we have the international conference. That's what we do. We pick the speakers for that. We decide the theme for that. And we continue to try to encourage the regions. And my ideal setup is that, a guy wants to be a Calvary. So the first thing he should do is wherever he is, he should find the nearest couple of Calvaries. Have a lunch appointment with the guy, sit down and say, hey, praying about starting something over here. And he can't decide whether to be a Calvary without, in a way, they're okay with it. In other words, they're going to say to the regional leader, hey, this guy's a good guy, let him come, let him on. And we've met with him, we've asked him questions. There's a fellowship there. We know he's a good guy. He's got to come. He understands what Calvary is. We've given him the book on the distinctives. In other words, they're doing it to help and encourage, not territorial. I mean, if someone wants to plant 5 minutes from another Calvary, that would be frowned upon. It's like, what's the point? Are you trying to feed off of the other one? No, you want to go into a place where there's a need. So that's why the people can make that decision the best are those that are right there.
Yeah, we are independent churches.
Yes, they're independent churches, and that's important because you've got to answer to God. I don't want people following the denominational party line, but rather, what is the Lord saying to you to do? Now, the distinctives which make us together, we all share in fellowship. We really believe them. And that's what Calvary, and if you don't believe them, look, go be something else. That's fine. We still love you. We'll still fellowship with you. You're still a brother, but you're just not this. You're just not this.
Yeah.
So we want to keep the integrity of that, but that happens in the community and the regional levels. And honestly, when it comes to, the Calvary Chapel Association, as far as the council, Chuck wanted us to oversee the movement. And the best way to oversee the movement is to serve the regions, and the regions serve the local Calvaries. That's how we see it.
Awesome. Well, I love going out to that international conference every year, or every other year. I wish it was every year sometimes. I also wish maybe it wasn't in California every single time sometimes, but that is the most economical place to put it because that's where all the
I am lobbying for the Answer Center in Kentucky because Ken Ham has
fun.
He has an amazing setup there, and they would give us a sweet deal, but makes some of the other guys a little nervous about moving it out of the Southern Cal. And they do a great job at Diamond Bar. So
yeah, they definitely do a great job out there, and I love to go, but a lot of times our guys from out here can't make it quite so far. But yeah. I'm not trying to say anything negative. It's great. So I want to you kind of hit on a couple things, and so I want to start negative, I guess, and then we'll end positive.
Sure.
So you mentioned a couple concerns that you have right now. You talk about guys that you kind of want to talk a lot of theology, but maybe don't have the right heart in things. So what are some of the, not that you are pessimistic, what are some of the things that concern you in Calvary Chapel and CCA right now?
I don't want to become an organization. We don't want to become this denomination. We really want to keep it simple. And that's kind of, the Word of God, the power of the Spirit of God, depending upon the Lord's leading, and encouraging people to be faithful and in being loving their wives, and those basic simple things, because a lot of who you are as a pastor is coming out of your personal character. So if you have somebody that wants to model how to be an international speaker and travel around, and even when it comes to what we see in our culture, podcasting is great. This is a podcast. But if your goal is to become to reach millions, but you can be a mile wide and an inch deep. There's nothing ever that can replace the church, the pillar of truth that God established. That community of people, they're gathered together, and they're all different, and they have to learn how to love each other. That's why I love that diversity of different backgrounds and ages and experiences, because that's where you learn how to love. And if there's one thing that Calvary Chapel was known for in the beginning, the Jesus Revolution testifies that I saw some of the things back in those days. It was like liquid love. You sense God's presence when you come among his people, and that speaks for itself, because the Lord then convicts as they come, and they long for that. The people are longing for genuine relationship, and you can get 1 million likes on your social media and still be depressed.
So is it that, just trying to parse this a little bit, do you think that it is the folks with less focus on planting churches and being church ministers and wanting to have different kinds of ministries in terms of social media stuff, or speaking more than planting the church? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
There's nothing wrong with any of those things as ancillary to church ministry, where God is working through the church. So this is a great example, because you're pastoring a church, you're loving your people, and but you want to reach people out there that don't have this kind of community, and so they can hear about this. I got to check that church out. So anyway, you get the word out. We did radio, very personal.
And real quick, it's also for our congregation as well, because we get asked doctrinal questions all the time, and when you find yourself answering the same questions over and over, it's it'd be really great if we just had something we could point them to and say, go listen to this. And there's so much weirdness on the internet too. It's let's give our people something to turn to, and whatever the Lord makes out of that, he makes out of that.
Answer a lot of those questions like we do live on Bridge Bible Talk. It's like people come with these questions and they pick up weird stuff here and there, and we kind of bring them back to the scriptures and kind of settle that. And the church as a whole in America is fractured in many ways, and I think this is where the Word of God binds us together. So let's just come back. That's where we have the agreement. We know God has spoken, so got to go there.
Great. All right. Well, then let's turn it around now and make it. Zach, do you have anything you want to jump on this? You were born and bred Calvary just like I was, and do you have any thoughts on any of that?
I was, yeah, and I know that we've had some conversations kind of offline about this. One question I would have, I guess, is, so I just like Tyler, I was conceived, born and raised, in the Calvary Chapel movement. This is the only church that I've ever attended has been a Calvary. And one of the things that I experienced, it's very similar to what you described about that progression you were talking about how you begin and you've had this convicting relationship. And that was for my parents. My parents both came out of the world, met each other after they had barely been saved in a Calvary Chapel, and just had these profound experiences. I was like this, and now I'm like that. Right. I never had that experience. I was saved when I was really, really small, as part of Crusade Evangelism, and I just always had kind of tried to walk with the Lord. One thing that has always saddened me is how long in my life of going to wonderful Calvary churches with wonderful people it took before I know that I can point to and say that I was filled with the Holy Spirit, and begin to understand what it was to be walking in the Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit. That happened when I was in my early 20s, when I moved to Virginia and began attending a different Calvary, and that was just this emphasis, Tyler, that your dad had was, no, you don't understand. You must be filled with the Holy Spirit. Like you must have this
Acts
experience.
19, have you received the Spirit since you believe?
Yeah, and one thing that as I've kind of gone through these last, I guess, more than 10 or 12 years with the Lord, I've become really jealous for that experience for people. And I've noticed a trend that I feel, and I don't want to be negative, but I have seen a lot more people in Calvary start to ask, where is that? Are we doing that? Is that something that you notice?
Yeah,
and what do you think about that?
Chuck had a prophetic insight into that, which is why in the last number of conferences he did, a lot of his message was, having begun in the Spirit, are we going to now perfect ourselves in the flesh? That is the danger. This is what happens. This is how we could become a denomination. We could just go through the motions, but that third generation is just going to be ho-hum. Yeah, this is how we do church. This is how I was raised, and that's all it is. But I really believe that you want to have a holy desperation. Look, here's a good good illustration. When you wake up in the morning and you have nothing really pressing against you, the Lord settled all the issues, you're feeling pretty good and, think this is going to be a good day. I found that if I trust that feeling, I am going to start my day on the wrong foot and I won't be prepared for what might come. So when I wake up in the morning and I feel great, I don't trust that feeling. I immediately realize, okay, Lord, I don't know what I'm going to face today, but I think the enemy's trying to set me off like I'm doing well. Everything's fine. We're fine. We're all fine. We're the church of the fine people. So I stir up a godly fear. Lord, I don't know what today's going to be. Lord, give me wisdom. Help me. And I'll begin to read his word. And another good illustration is, people read their Bible by habit, which is good. But sometimes they're just reading words and their mind is elsewhere. And sometimes I do that. When I find my mind straying and I don't realize what I just read for the last minute, I'll stop and I'll go back and start over again. I'm always reminded of something my brother-in-law taught me in construction. He says, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, you sure don't have time to do it again. So I will then go back and start over again. And this time I'm afraid to miss what he's saying. And now it's like the Word of God comes alive. So I have to stir up my own heart, because any of us can get lethargic. Any of us can get, well, God is blessed and, I don't have to work that hard at it. Don't let him set you up, because otherwise you're going to find yourself slipping away, and you might not even know you're not filled with the Spirit until something comes out of your mouth like, wow, did I just say that? Or an attitude that really prevails, or even some breakdown in relationship. Then you realize, wow, I need to come back and, Lord, forgive me and just fill me once again with your Spirit.
Right, and that's what you shared on last night at the church, was about be filled with the Holy Spirit. Right?
It's a be being. It's a
present imperative. It's ongoing. Right. It's you have everything that the Lord has provided for you for me to make this command to you, which is to be filled with the Spirit. Make it your business to see to it that you have the Holy Spirit with you at all times.
If we think we have enough of what it takes to do this work, we have to be reminded that the best we can do is bring a few loaves and fishes, and unless the Lord multiplies it, we got nothing. Unless the Lord builds a house, we labor in vain. And I'm always reminding my staff and our volunteers and myself, Lord, I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I got this message, I worked it, it sounds good, I think I got what you're saying, but Lord, you're God, you know. So if we have that holy desperation, right, he will answer.
Yeah. No, that's it, man. And I like to use this illustration of, not really illustration, but illustrate this point where once you've been in a church service where you're worshiping and you're singing and the Holy Spirit just knocks you out and like you're down on the floor weeping, or even if you're standing up and cheering and celebrating, you just have one of those amazing, it doesn't happen all the time, but oh my goodness, we met God here. Right. Once you've done that, every time you come into a worship service after that, it's never the same, because you know that's always the possibility. And that's, we're still worshiping the Lord out of obedience, and we're still, being edified, and we're worshiping the Lord because he deserves it. But there's that, oh man, what if this is one of those days where that anticipation, right? Of, I think Spurgeon used to call it the romance of preaching, is like sometimes you get up there and you preach and man, people just are saved and they're delivered, and you don't know when it's going to happen, but it might be this time. And that's kind of like what walking in the Spirit is like, we can encounter God today. So, well, let me ask you then this, Pastor Lloyd, what excites you about Calvary Chapel right now, the CCA? What excites you about what's happening and what's coming?
I randomly, went into a bunch of Calvary websites, throughout the country. I didn't know anything about them, and I'd go on their website and I'd find their teaching, and I'd go on and I'd listen to a little of the message, and I'm like, wow, okay, going through the scriptures. That encouraged me greatly, that people realize that we got nothing but the Word of God, and we better be diligent to expound it, because the Word of God has power. And then, that aspect of knowing that, there's still that need where people can get comfortable in that style, but look, to see somebody taking a step of faith and doing something unique to them tells me they're following the Lord. And so I'm encouraged that there's a lot of, the Calvary magazine kind of reflects a lot of things going on around the country. That's always encouraging to me, like, wow, that's a great idea. Doesn't make, I'm going to do that because that's for them, but I'm encouraged. That's a great step of faith. That's amazing. So I get inspired. Look, well, the Bible says outdo one another in love. I think we should all as pastors be thinking about how can we outdo one another in love? Not out of a competition to look at me, but wow, that inspires me. I'm gonna take a step of faith too. So I'm encouraged that there's that happening. Again, 1,000 Calvaries added since Chuck passed, when I would have thought the movement would have splintered in many ways.
How many of those are domestic versus international? So how many of those are in the States versus around the world?
Well, I would say, if I'm a betting man, there's a good percentage of, it's about the same percentage that multiplied overseas as it did over here. Because I just came back from Peru. There was 70 pastors there of Calvary chapels at this gathering in Trujillo.
Yeah, Corey Kilgus, I preached there this last month or last year, and he's a good friend of ours. So he's doing an amazing thing down there.
I flipped out when a lot of the guys from Colombia came up to me and they said, "We remember you." And I'm like, wait. I was there 30 years ago. And they still remember me. And that was humbling, because it was like, I was a young guy then. And they're just so hungry about every little thing they get. They don't forget. And that was humbling, because, I'm busy here and there, and I didn't remember them particularly, but they remembered. And so when we pour into places like that, Peru or South America or even Africa, so seeing in Africa such sweet unity at that pastors' conference in Eldoret, and then over in Hungary, I shared in Calvary Budapest when I went there, going over to Ukraine, and I'm talking to some of the guys, and they're helping the refugees, they're doing stuff. So wherever I go, it's like God seems to be honoring His word. And as long as we continue to depend upon His Spirit and not the arm of the flesh, I believe the Lord's going to continue to bless.
That's great. Yeah, and we represent here that generation that is coming up, because I never met Pastor Chuck Smith.
Right.
And I've visited Costa Mesa before, but I never... he wasn't there, and so I wasn't there, obviously, in the Jesus movement. I've heard all the stories, but one of the things we talk about a lot, Zach and I and our friends, we've got a lot of guys down in Lower Alabama that feel the same way. It's like, those are great, but we want our own stories now. We're excited for the next thing.
That reminds me, you asked what really makes me excited probably the most is God is doing something in our church in the young generation, the 20s, 30-something. And I'm pouring into what I call my PLS crew, pastors, leaders, and servants in training. And man, I tell you, the hunger, I'm taking them through some pretty weighty, heavy things to sort through. I'm not giving them pablum. I'm really challenging them. I'm telling them to get out. We did a table at the fair. We had to engage with people, and I dialogue with people. And I'm watching the next generation raise up right in front of me. And that's exciting, because as I get a little bit older, I don't know if the Lord could take me home this year, next year, a decade from now. I'm confident God is going to handle what He's going to do.
Yeah, there's some of us. I remember I was talking to Anthony Ray down from Dothan, Alabama one time, and I think maybe Joey from Baton Rouge was there too, and we were all talking, and we had been somewhere at a meeting or something where an older pastor was just kind of singing a swan song over his life and Calvary Chapel and the world, and it's like, it's all over and this is the end. And it's been great while it lasted, but time it's like, buddy, I'm just getting started, man.
Up.
I'm ready.
There's a lot going on.
I realize it's been, I realize how things have fallen, but Zach and I didn't watch them fall.
Right.
We kind of woken up, and then this is our world. And so, the first message I ever gave at Calvary Chapel Trussville, we called it the Church on Defense. Because it's like, that's the switch is now we're having to play defense as opposed to being the dominant force in the culture or a force in the culture. It's all going to be back. But, I like playing defense because you got to be a little rougher. You got to be a little tougher. You got to be willing to take a few hits and take losses, but manage them and keep going. And I'm very excited for what's coming next among us, man. There's some great people that the Lord is using.
Spurgeon said, be on fire for God and people will come out and watch you burn. And it reminds me of Peter's mention in 1 Peter 3:15, which often gets used by apologetics ministries to say, give a reason or give a defense for the hope that's in you. And they somehow bypass that word hope. And they realize that's the only reason why someone would want a reason for what you believe. They see hope. They see hope in you. And that makes them ask the question, what makes you so hopeful? What is it about you? What makes you tick? And then you give them a reason. It's Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You heard Pastor Lloyd, zero pessimists allowed.
Yeah, well, we worship a Lord who died on the cross and rose from the dead. We don't get to like be, oh, well, it's too late now. It's like, what, too late? Jesus was dead for 3 days, and he came back, and we're his servants. So that's a great place to end it, unless, Zach, you want to jump in and have the last word.
No, that's encouraging, man. And that's we're really blessed to hear things like that, Pastor Lloyd, because you, like Tyler said, this is in many ways, we see ourselves as, we want to be prepared to do well. We want to do well by the Lord, of course, and we want to honor the Lord. But we also have looked back and we see men that some of the men that raised me up in the faith and that were my pastors, that they're with the Lord now. So we realize that this is our turn to do well by them and honor what they're handing off to us, and it's important to us to hear that this is what we should be following, this is what we should be doing, this is the path that we should be walking, and we think a lot of that, and we really want to. It's important to us to obey the Lord and to carry that on. So it's good to hear just what you're seeing from a broader perspective. It's encouraging to us.
Yeah, God is working.
Yes, He is. Well, thanks so much, Pastor Lloyd, for coming on the podcast with us today.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So if you guys want to know more about Pastor Lloyd's, Calvary Chapel Old Bridge, it's the Bridge Women's Center, Bridge FM. Am I missing anything?
A lot of bridges.
A lot of bridges, yeah.
Bridge Life Thrift, but Bridge, Bridging the Gap is my radio program. And then we have Bridge Talk Radio. So yeah, we kind of capitalized on the word bridge and Old Bridge for some reason.
There you go. Hey, well, we're the IronWorks everything. So this is great. Yeah, and you've been listening to the IronWorks podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will resume our series in the Trinity next time. But thanks for sticking with us this long and talking about a lot of great things. So we will see y'all next time on the IronWorks podcast. Bye bye.
Thanks, guys.